Thanks, Matt.
Thanks, Matt. Hi, everyone. Sorry, I'm just going to change my view. I can see all of you, and it's freaking me out a bit. Right. Hello. Thank you all for coming tonight. So, yeah, those of you who've been on the Wild Swim Talks before will know me as an outdoor swim coach. But before swimming completely overtook my life, I worked in the environment sector for 15 years. So this is not only important to me from a swimming perspective, but also important to me from an environment perspective. We can't survive as a human species without clean water. And it's really important to me that we get people to understand what the issues are, as well as ways that they can help support better river health as well. So we're going to talk tonight specifically about river pollution and river water quality. There's lots and lots of stuff as well on the coast, but kind of the more recent publicity has been about river stuff. So that's what we're going to focus on tonight. Lindsay's joining me tonight because she's done some amazing adventures with her magnificent mermaid tail down the Thames and the River Avon. So we're going to talk about those in a little bit. I had a really good chat with Lindsay last week and a catch up on it. Yeah, the fantastic stories from her trips. But before, I'm just going to check the poll first. Right, so this is an interesting point, because when I very first started swimming outside, a lot of people were really concerned that I was swimming in really dirty waters. Now, outdoor water is outdoor water. It's not a chlorinated pool. It's not perfectly clean. It's not got chemicals in it to keep it clean. There are animals in it. There are plants in it. There is soil and all kinds of random stuff in the water outdoors. But I knew from years of kayaking before I started swimming outdoors that I've never been ill as a result of kayaking down various rivers, falling into various rivers unintentionally. And when I started taking friends out, there was one friend in particular who said, "I'm not coming swimming outdoors. It's swimming with turds. That's horrible. You know, you've got no idea what's in the water." So I now have a WhatsApp group with some friends, which is called Swimming with Turds. I don't know whether Anna's on the call tonight, but if she's not, she should know that she's got a name check. So before we go into having a good chat with Lindsay about her adventures, I'm going to try and do a 5-minute quick fire rundown of what the situation is. Now, I assume that most of you that are on here have read the news over the last couple of years, have seen various headlines talking about water quality and sewage outflows, all kinds of stuff. And the poll has rung that true, because only 2% have come on and said, no, I'm not in any way worried about water quality. 80% have said a little bit worried, but doesn't stop me swimming. And yes, 18% we've got, yes, it completely puts me off. So I'm curious as to whether those 9 people in the room have actually been swimming outdoors. Right, so let me get rid of that one. So I am going to screen share, but not what I normally do, but I've got a PowerPoint presentation to show you all, because otherwise I will forget what I need to say. It is mainly to remind me what to talk about. Right, where's the screen share?
I think someone might have the mics on.
Oh, could you hear some random background noise?
Oh, there you go, it stopped.
It stopped. Okay.
Oh.
That's probably silenced them. Let me get this screenshot up. There we go. So, can everybody see what I've just shared? I can't see the chat anymore. Ah! There we go. That's better. Right. So we have a beautiful picture of Lindsay in her gorgeous mermaid tail with her. So I became aware of Lindsay when I saw these pictures on Instagram of this. Well, I knew of Lindsay, but then this particular trip appeared a picture of Lindsay on Instagram with a giant inflatable poo. Now, I've got 2 boys at home and we have a lot of this kind of conversation in our house. So it just instantly entranced us. My boys were like, "Oh, where's the mermaid with the poo going today?" So we do have problems with pollution and sewage outfalls in our ways. Now, these are some of the headlines we've had. over the last couple of years. Some of you will be familiar with them, I have no doubt. So some of the water companies have had massive fines. Southern Water got fined, was it 90 million? Can't quite see it on my screen. But that took 7 years for that to reach prosecution and for the fine to be issued. 2020, water companies released raw sewage via overflows more than 400,000 times. That's a lot. There have been problems on the River Wye where they have a lot of chicken farms and a lot of excessive nutrients in their waterways down there. Big one in the last couple of weeks has been the revelation that Environment Agency staff have been told to stop monitoring or not pay attention to low-level pollution incidents that have been reported because they don't have sufficient funding to cover the really, really low-level pollution incidents that get reported. Now, the quote at the bottom, 19.1% of people in England said that worries about pollution and water quality often prevented them from swimming. This is from new research that's coming out in a couple of weeks from Outdoor Swimmer magazine. And they did the same report last year and the same survey last year. And actually, that percentage of people who are worried has gone up in the last year because of all the publicity it's had. Now, what I really want to get at is, are our rivers really in such bad health? Now, there are people who argue that, well, actually, no, they're fine. We've had otters reappearing in a lot of rivers. We've had salmon reappearing in some of our waterways. And yes, our waterways and our coasts are in better condition than they were back in the 70s when we had masses of very intensive industrial pollution. So we had manufacturing, we had lots of industrial processes in the UK. Now, in that time, a lot of those industrial processes have been shipped out to the Far East. We don't do those anymore. A combination of that and better regulation has seen our rivers improve significantly in that time, particularly in urban areas. So a lot of our urban rivers have improved massively. But actually what's happened, the rural rivers haven't improved. They've actually declined in that time. A lot of people will say, well, hang on, my river's perfectly clean. I swim in a river every day and I'm fine. I've never been poorly. What's really important to understand is that rivers are very dynamic, changing environments, and depending on where you are, yes, your river might be very, very clean. If you're in a very rural environment where there aren't many houses or there aren't many potential points of pollution, then it may very well be very clean. But that doesn't mean that we don't still have a problem that we need to tackle, because we've reached a peak of the water being good, and the river quality is now declining again. Lots and lots of reasons for that, and I'll go on to that in the next one. The Environment Agency, as a statutory body to look after the environment, monitor our waterways, but their funding has been cut so significantly that they don't monitor it as well as they used to, so we don't have a full picture. Now, the big thing that's come out this year is that only 14% of our rivers reach good ecological status. So that means they're a really healthy habitat for animals, plants, etc., etc. And 0% of our waterways reach good chemical status. So that means that they contain chemicals that may be harmful to the environment and indeed to other swimmers. Come on to the next one. So what are the big contributors to poor water quality in the UK? Now, obviously, in the last couple of years, the water companies have got, to be fair, quite rightly, a drubbing in the media. They have been accused of all kinds of things. They've really, really been slated, and they haven't invested properly and they haven't done the right things. But it's really important to be mindful that it isn't just the water companies that pollute our waterways. There's a lot of pollution comes from agriculture, so from field runoff, from fertilizers, from animal manures, which again, I don't want to be swimming in animal manure when I'm in the water, as well as urban runoff. So a lot of runoff off roads, accidental spills in urban areas as well contribute quite significantly. So what are the concerns for swimmers from this pollution? So there are certain things that pollution incidents that occur that are not going to make us significantly poorly. They will affect an ecosystem and they will damage plant life, they will damage fish life, but as a human, they're not necessarily going to cause us problems. But the big ones that we want to be thinking about are sewage spills. Now these occur where sewage is allowed to overflow into our rivers. Okay, the reason it is allowed to overflow is to stop it backing up into our houses in times of heavy rain. Now the legislation allows for water companies to discharge this sewage in exceptional circumstances. What we have started to realise in the last couple of years is that those exceptional circumstances are becoming more and more regular, more frequent than we ever expected them to be, partly due to higher rainfall, more intense rainfall that we're getting as a result of climate change, but also as a result of our sewer networks just not being able to cope. They're getting blocked, they're getting overwhelmed by a population. And the things we need to think about, the material that's going to end up in the river that's going to affect us are going to cause things like stomach bugs, and they're going to cause ear, nose and throat irritation, so kind of stuffy noses, ear infections, that kind of stuff. If you chat to a lot of surfers particularly, they'll report ear infections, and it's often because the water's polluted out at the coast. Animal waste, again, it's a case of things like stomach bugs and ear, nose and throat problems. And then into that, which some of you will be familiar with, is the phenomenon of blue-green algae. Now, blue-green algae thrives in an environment that has too many nutrients. So too many nutrients come from things like sewage. They can come from phosphates that are put into our water supply to help keep the water clean. And when an environment gets too many nutrients in it, blue-green algae, other algae can take over. They reduce the oxygen levels in the water and they will suffocate the river system, so nothing else grows. So it takes away the biodiversity in that healthy environment. Rivers need to be healthy environments to keep themselves clean. So some of the problems I've kind of covered a little bit. We're seeing more and more incidents of blocked sewers. So sewer systems are backing up, they're overflowing, increased intensity of rainfall, increasing population. This is a really, really important one. So there is, under planning legislation in the UK, a right to connect to the water system. So if you build a housing development, you have a right to connect to the water system, so to have water pumped, clean water pumped to your house by a water provider, and for your wastewater to be taken away, regardless of whether the water company has the capacity to deal with that water. So it's very easy to see how facilities, so water treatment works that were designed for populations 20 years ago, now can't cope with the amount of development and the amount of people we now have. That's one of the really, really big problems. A lack of monitoring. When I've dug into this more and more, and I've got a really good friend who works in the water sector, it astounds me that we don't have really good baseline understanding of what the problems are. We don't understand the quantity of waste that is pumped out of these sewer overflows. The data that you might see in the media, they talk about hours of effluent release. Now, all they monitor on some of those releases is the duration of the event. It doesn't measure the volume, so the amount of water that goes out, and it doesn't measure the quality of the water that's going out. So it could be a teeny tiny little trickle that comes out of that sewer overflow, or it could be a massive, enormous gush, and there could be gallons and gallons and gallons of water going out. Equally, the quality of the water may vary significantly. So in some places, it may be very, very well diluted, and any sewage may be very, very well diluted by rainwater. Actually, it's not going to cause massive problems. In some places, it may be just pure sewage that's being pumped out, but we don't know what the difference is. So we don't have a really good picture of how bad and how poor the quality of our waters are still. And poor enforcement. So what I said at the beginning about the Thames water fine coming through, it took 7 years for that to come through. That's pretty standard. There was another one recently came through that took 5 years to come to prosecution. The water companies, polluters, whether that be industry or a farm or whoever, they're just not being jumped on quick enough to have a big impact. And it's a complicated picture. So as we're going along tonight, I think that's my last my last slide. I'll stop screen sharing. So as we go along tonight, please feel free to bung questions in the chat box, and I will try and answer them as best I can. So anyway, enough of the boring bit. We're going to have a lovely chat with Lindsay now, and she's going to tell us all about her lovely mermaid journeys. So Lindsay, unmute yourself. Hello.
Hello, good evening, everyone. Thank you for coming.
So, yeah, so Lindsay, I wanted to describe you as an adventurer as well, because you've done all kinds of crazy adventures all over the world. But you ended up back in the UK, didn't you? A few years ago?
Yeah.
So tell us. So you mermaided down the Thames and down the Avon. Remind me what year they were in.
Yeah. So
I can't remember.
In 2018, I swam the River Thames as a mermaid because I was out in Bali learning to free dive, and I cut my hand on a piece of plastic one evening while swimming. I thought it was just a scratch, but I turned around and there was tons of tiny bits of plastic, and it was pretty grim, but also really sad because Bali or Indonesia is meant to be a paradise, and it is really beautiful, but there's just plastic everywhere. And so I wanted to do something about it, and I returned home, and I grew up. I'm a bit of an adventurer, but I grew up as a competitive swimmer, albeit I wasn't really very competitive. And I'd never done a swimming-based adventure. And I was scrolling through Instagram, looking at people with freediving accounts, because I just got into it. And I realized some people wear a monofin and some even wear a mermaid tail. So I thought, I'd a mermaid down the River Thames, swim down the River Thames as a mermaid to highlight how we're choking our wildlife with plastic. And my friend, if you do a long swim adventure, you have to have a support boat. So my friend supported me, and she's an artist, and she made this giant, this is a mini version, she made a giant mermaid sculpture, made it out of, I think it was 200 bottles or something, recycled bottles of plastic. And any waste we found, we put in her gob. We called her Samantha. And yeah, it was great. It was just a bit of an ad hoc spur. I worked pretty hard on the logistics. There's a lot of logistics involved with an adventure swim, but lots of people came to join me, and this is before I even really knew there was an outdoor swimming community. So it was really quite overwhelming to see the love for people have for swimming outside. But along the way, I came across a drowning cow and thought it was a giant white plastic bag tangled in a tree. And I'm getting closer, and we realized it was a cow. So we called the police and RSPCA, and they sent 6 firemen to pull her out. And they wrapped their hose around her and made her swim to the other side of the river. And she was met by the vet and reunited with her calf the next day. And the day after that, I was on page 3 of The Sun with the headline, "Mermaid Saves Drowning Cow." And so everyone found out about my mission. And then 6 months later, a school asked me if they could have, for my permission to turn my story into their school play. I went along to watch, and it was the most adorable thing. So I thought I should turn it into a kid's book, which I've done here. And upon touring Britain last year, wearing my mermaid tail and reading it to kids, I realized what a great tool being a mermaid is, because it's really engaging to talk to kids about important topics. So then when last summer river pollution was hitting the news, I thought I would mermaid my local river, the Avon, with a giant poo sculpture. I
love the poo.
Yeah, looking for I had a film made about it, which we'll share in the link here. But we met lots of experts and professionals who either live by the river or work in river health, to ask them about what's going on, but also whether they'd seen an otter, because it just makes it a bit more fun for kids. Otters are the top of the food chain, top of the ecosystem in terms of rivers. So if the river pollution kills the insects. There's no food for the fish, and then the fish die off, and then there's no food for the otters, so they go elsewhere. So it's a mermaid otter in the poo.
I can't wait. Yeah, I know. I'm really looking forward to the book coming out for that one. So you did your Thames trip. Was that over winter?
Yes, it was in November. It was very cold.
Yeah, I can imagine. Is that the one that you wore the nude suit on as well?
Yeah, I wanted to look as much like a mermaid as possible. So I wore this nude coloured wetsuit. And it was so cold that I wore 2 wetsuits. I wore another a swimming wetsuit underneath, and then a new coloured. And then I wore 2 sets of gloves and 2 sets of boots. But it was so cold that I had to have a hood, and the hood was black and squished my face up like this. So I didn't look like much of a mermaid anyway.
You did. You had a tail on. Yeah. So that was in November. So what time of year did you do the Avon trip?
September just gone.
Yeah,
but it was pretty bad weather as well. So it was really sunny. We had a period of brilliant sunshine for 4 straight weeks. And I was just resenting it because I knew as soon as I started, the rain was going to come, and it came on the first day. It was torrential. I was all right, actually, but my mum was my support canoe. And so she got drenched. And Pippa, my dog, who's snoring down here, she was in the support canoe with my mum, and she wasn't happy at all.
Just wet and miserable.
Yeah.
So when you did the Avon trip, you got quite poorly, didn't you?
Yes. So it took me 6 days, and on the 4th day, at the beginning of the 4th day, I was feeling queasy, and I stayed in a nice plush hotel that I managed to blag, and I ran up to my room to get something, and on opening the door, I just vomited all over the floor, which isn't nice. And I thought it was just sort of like a one-off. Then I went to meet the others by the canoe, and I was meeting Michelle Walker from the Rivers Trust. So she was joining us for that day to show us an experiment, how to test water quality. And I didn't feel great at all. And when you mermaid, it's like butterfly kick. So it's a lot of strain.
It's right from your core, isn't it? Yeah, it's hard. It's really, really hard.
So with swimming, front crawl, if you're not feeling great, you can just power your arms and let your body follow. But with butterfly, it's just pulling on those muscles that aren't feeling good anyway. And so I started off just doing front crawl, and then I had to get out on different stages in the river because I was sick. And then I wanted to get to Kingsham, and I was about a mile off, which doesn't sound like a lot, but swimming, it's when you're not feeling great, that's another 20 minutes.
That's a long way.
Yeah. So we got out, and then we did an experiment. I was with Izzy from Earthwatch then. We did another experiment. And actually my camera girl, she wanted a shot where she put a GoPro under the water to see us taking a water sample. Yeah. And she didn't quite get it. So she asked me to do it 5 or 6 times, and I had to lean, and I was like, oh, Charlotte. And then maybe 5 minutes later, I was just projectile vomit everywhere. And then I was really ill all that day. We had to blag a lift because we had my poo, and we had to get the canoe to the start the next day because of the logistics. I'd married up the logistics with volunteers, etc. So if you're out of kilt, then it just throws everything. And then the next day I just sat in a canoe for the whole day, and it was torrential rain. But I was feeling better, but it was quite good to sit in a canoe, because then I went past all the overflows and saw discoloured water gushing out, and sometimes it really smelt as well. So it would have, even if I was well, it would have been silly to swim in that.
To swim through it. Yeah. So there's your classic example of it. So that I didn't really cover it well enough when I went through that thing, but we have kind of 2 sewage overflows. So we get sewage overflows from water treatment works. So when they get so much rain through them that they can't deal with all the water, they're permitted to just put the waste effluent straight into the river. But then we have something called combined sewer overflows, which people will have seen in media. That CSOs have been named many, many times in the last couple of years. And this is where we have a system where the foul sewer and the surface water sewer. So we in a lot of places, we have two separate systems. So we have foul sewer, so the stuff from your toilet and your sink in your house goes after one particular pipe off to the sewage treatment works, and then surface water that's gathered kind of off your roof, off driveways, off the road, whatever, then goes down separate pipes. When we get lots and lots and lots and lots and lots of rain, those systems, both of those systems can become overwhelmed, and that's at the point at which they're allowed to the water starts to rise and they start to combine, and then they overflow into these combined sewer overflows. It's not a great system. It's a system that was introduced in the 1800s. It's very, very old. More modern developments don't have it, but the vast majority of our drainage network is like that, which is why when we get really heavy rain, we get this mixing of the two different water outlets from houses, from industry, from all kinds of properties. So your September Mermaid trip, we had really, really heavy rain. So all of the CSOs were flowing, therefore you got poorly.
Yeah, I don't know though, because it was after Bath, which makes sense because Bath was pretty grim. But also Izzy from Earthwatch suggested it said it was mucking season. So it could have been agricultural because Bath is really hilly. And the day before I got ill, and the two days before I got ill, it was really rainy. And the day before it was a little bit rainy. So it could have been muck or fertilizer or whatever running down. But then also there was some nasty pipes going into Bath as well. So.
Yeah, this is the thing. I think we don't really understand, because it's not monitored well enough. We don't necessarily always understand what is causing the pollution. So it's then very difficult to track it back and go, okay, this is where it needs to stop, because it's coming from so many different places. And I know that many, many, many moons ago, I studied kind of nitrates and phosphates and what you are and are allowed to spread onto land from an agricultural perspective. And there are regulations of when farmers are allowed to spread and when they should spread, and there's some really clear guidance on it, but it's not well monitored, it's not well inspected. I think recent data coming out from the Environment Agency suggested that on average each farm will get inspected every 265 years because they don't get inspected often enough. So it's like, well, there's no incentive there to follow the rules, if that makes sense. Because there's nothing there monitoring it.
Someone's just said that's a great explanation of why not to swim after heavy rain, especially putting your head underwater, which is true. But when I did the Thames, that was 22 days in November through rain. There was maybe 5 days. There was a significant amount of rain, and I wasn't ill once. So I don't know. I mean, I don't know why I was ill just swimming in 6 days and not once going through Oxford, Reading, and Maidenhead and Windsor, which is pretty populated, and through agricultural. But it's not so hilly.
It's not quite steep and hilly. But this is exactly the problem that we have as swimmers, is we don't know. There's so much uncertainty about it, and I know that there's demand and pressure being put on the Environment Agency and on the water companies to monitor it better so that they can report back on river health, so that for the likes of us as swimmers, but also for kayakers as well. I was a kayaker for years, and luckily I never got poorly, but I do have friends who paddled on specific rivers where they knew there was a risk they would get sick. And it's that lack of clarity. But what we need to move towards is a better monitoring system so that we at least understand it, and then maybe it can get cleaned up.
Well, it's very confusing, and that's why I think it was great what happened last October and November, re the government, because there was so much noise made about it to put it on everyone's minds, really, because lots of people swim, and often I've been told, oh, why are you swimming there? Don't swim in the city. Oh, that's disgusting. But why not? If you've got a river running through your town or your city, why shouldn't we be able to swim? Why?
Absolutely.
We should just make noise to put pressure on the people to make it cleaner. And again, going back to the otters, in the 70s, otters were on the brink of extinction. And then these highly harmful pesticides were made extinct, not because of the otters in decline, but because the pesticides were getting into like the water system and affecting pregnant women. But as a result, then otters became on the rise. So we can do good. And just because we turned that around and the rivers are healthier than they were in the 70s doesn't mean, well, we can just sit back and
I know this. I hear quite a few people argue that, well, yes, but the rivers are much healthier than they were because we've got otters. And it's like, yes, they are, but they're going back down again. We've kind of hit the high point, and now they're going to decline, increase in population, and we are going to get impacts from climate change. As our climate changes and rainfall events become more intense, and drought events become more intense as well. So we get kind of how poorly you're going to get from water depends on the count of particles basically that are going to go into your body, and then your ability to fight them off. So if that particle count is very tiny, your body will fight them off. If it's very high, your body won't be able to fight them off. And having more water in a system means that that pollution can be diluted to the point that it won't make you ill. Now, in periods of drought, obviously those materials aren't being diluted, so they're going to be more damaging, not only to human health, but also to river health as well. And we're going to get more extremes of climate. That's going to make that worse.
And I think that's the important thing, really, because to us, it just makes us, well, to me, it just made me sick. And I know it can, in extreme cases, make people blind, which is obviously horrendous. But if it makes me sick, a 5'6" human, then imagine what it does to the fish and wildlife that ingest it. And that's what's sad, because we can do something about it.
And fundamentally it's a circle. Anybody please remember from school the water cycle. It's a closed loop system. So the water that's in the river, if that's dirty, that means it's got to be treated before it can come back into our homes for us to use as drinking water as well. So whether that's water that's coming out of a river, or whether it's water that's gone the long way around, gone into the sea, evaporated, come back through again. Equally, groundwater that gets contaminated as well. That puts a big cost onto treating that water so that it's suitable for human consumption. Also, as well as that cost, there's the climate impact, and a carbon impact, because if you have to treat water more, you have to put it through more processes. All those processes have a carbon impact, have an environmental impact of their own. So you can see how it escalates more and more and more, and why it gets much more complicated.
And I also think a lot of people don't know it was a great title, What's in the Water? What was the title?
What's in the water?
A lot of people won't be aware, so you might go for a lovely walk along the river and not know how polluted it is, because you can't see the lack of fish or the buildup of sediment deep down. So it was really beautiful to see the amount of people coming together in October, because everyone started talking about what they can do, or solutions like citizen science, or writing to your MP, or petitioning. All these things actually do stuff.
So I think we should talk about what happened in October. So Lindsay was really critical in this, because it was timed perfectly when you were doing your journey. You were crowdfunding for the film, weren't you? So you were doing tons and tons of promo. But at the time, the Environment Bill was going through Parliament. Now, the Environment Bill replaces all of the environment legislation that we had when we were part of Europe. So because of Brexit, all of that is having to be reconstituted into UK law. So the Environment Bill was replacing all of that. And in the water section, the Environment Bill was really, really weakening the laws that we used to have on water quality, water pollution, what people can and can't put into our waterways. And it was shocking. It went to the Lords. The Lords went, no, what Parliament have put in is not okay. You need to change it all to this. And it ping-ponged, didn't it, between the House of Commons and the House of Lords for a while. And what was absolutely fantastic to see was when it came back
into laws, isn't it?
Yeah. And when it came back into Parliament, it got enough promotion, this reduction in standards, that the public were writing intensely to their MPs to say, no, you need to change this, you need to make this stronger, it needs to be better, we don't want dirty water. And the government had to back down. It was amazing, wasn't it? I mean, I certainly wrote a letter. I know loads of people who did. And Surfers Against Sewage set up a really easy to do petition letter that you could just fill in your details. It would find who your MP was. It was dead. It took 5 minutes to do, and it was so effective. So
really effective, because I think, number one, when you say write to your MP, people have no idea what to say, and they don't have time. So if it's just a simple, I think less than 60 seconds. So yeah, it was really effective.
Yeah. And as a result of that, it changed it. It's still not what it should be in my book. The requirements of it are still limited. Basically, the requirements of it now are that plans have to be made to start monitoring our waters better. The water companies have to monitor their outfalls better. They have to have real-time monitoring on things so that they know exactly what's happening, so that we can get to the point where they can publish data, so that the likes of you and I can find out what state the river's in before we get in it. So we will see. To my mind, there aren't enough targets, there aren't enough penalties, there aren't enough statutory requirements in it, but yeah.
But it's I think, because again, I was pretty gutted about it all, but talking to my friend Michelle from the Rivers Trust, she said, but we can look at the positives and think about, because she's been banging on about river health and pollution for decades, and the fact that it's really in the forefront of everyone's minds now, of ordinary people, is quite remarkable. So we just need to keep the momentum up.
Well, yeah, and I think what's been wonderful, and I know we talked about this on the last ShAFF talk, and we'll talk about it on the next one as well with Nick, is the massive increase we've had in outdoor swimming in the last 2 years has had an effect on this, because so many more people are becoming aware of it, and so many more people are getting more connected with nature and therefore want to try and protect it. So, swimming is a really positive force for change. It's ace. It's wonderful.
It is.
So we're going to go on to a little bit more kind of useful information. So when I choose where I swim, there are certain things I look for. What kind of stuff do you think about when you're choosing your swim spot? What are the things to look out for, to make sure that where you're swimming is potentially clean enough to not make you poorly?
Yeah, well, I've been swimming in the Avon for the last couple of years, and pretty much every week. And even after rain, I would still get in, but I might not put my head under, or definitely not swallow. But I think a really strong factor is to go with instinct. So if you just have a bad gut feeling about something, then don't get in. And by that I mean, you can tell if it's a bit stagnant, or if it's still and not moving very quickly, or if there's a smell or foam, discolored foam, or if there's discoloration. And actually, an interesting one, which I don't know enough about, but milky water can appear really pretty, but it's often from agricultural runoff, isn't it? Or is that right?
Yeah, again, it's a minefield.
It's an absolute minefield, and the more you look into it, the more research you do, the more complicated it becomes.
Yeah. In where I am, we get milky waters when it's in limestone, so the limestone dissolves. Certainly a lot of quarries around us, and that isn't basically that makes the water really alkali, so it will burn your skin. It's like swimming in Damascus.
Oh wow.
So some quarries near me, great. Others really bad, don't go in them. But yeah, certain fertilizers and stuff will make the water a funny color. But if you see discoloration in the water and you can kind of see where it's coming from, you can sometimes make quite a good judgment call of what it is. So if it's coming off a field, it could be slurry that's been spread. It could be fertilizer that's been spread that's washed off because the Imogen's just said clay lakes can look milky but are clean. There you go, you see. So ones near me that are milky, no go, but clay lakes are fine because again the sediment dissolves into the water, but actually clay is quite an inert mineral, so isn't going to cause any problems.
Yeah, and someone's just mentioned that they swim in the lakes, and what flows into the lakes does concern does run off directly into the lakes. And there's a guy, Matt, who I've become friends with in the last few months. I can't remember his second name actually, but he's been campaigning up in the lakes, and there's a lot of algae blooms which comes from the chemicals from the runoff, and quite a few people have disbelieved him, saying you can't get runoff. How can you get runoff in the lakes? But it comes from up in the tarns, but you can.
Yeah. So some of the big lakes do have problems with blue-green algae up in Cumbria. There will be some land runoff, but actually, and this has particularly come up at Lake Windermere, a lot of so blue-green algae is caused by an excess of nutrients, so it needs lots of phosphate and nitrate to feed the algae to regenerate and grow, and a lot of the sources of that are sewage and sewage outfalls. So there's lots and lots of, certainly Windermere, there's lots of properties that back onto the lake that have septic tanks. Some of them have their own, what they're called packaged water treatment works. So it's like a really, really tiny water treatment works that's just designed for that house. Now, if they aren't maintained properly, they will be putting out stuff that has not been treated very well and is still dirty. And equally, it's quite common that you get leaks from septic tanks. So there will be leaks going into the lakes, and that's what causes a lot of the blooms. I know there was an article recently about Windermere and how dirty it is, and because the lakes have become so much more popular in the last couple of years, simply this quantity of visitors going to Cumbria is causing problems.
And it's huge, isn't it? Matt was saying that I think Cumbria, the Lake District, is the second most popular tourist destination in Britain after London. Is that right?
It's Susanna, who was on the talk we did in January. She's based up in the lakes, and she said she can't believe how busy it is. She's having to structure all of her coaching sessions around when she knows she can get parked.
Wow.
Because it's just so much busier. It's mental. I went up 2020, I think, maybe in the back end of the summer when we were free for a little bit, and I couldn't believe it. We tried to swim at Bottomere, then Crummock Water, and we couldn't get parked anywhere.
Wow.
It was I've never seen it quite like that.
Yeah, and these lakes should be pristine, shouldn't they?
Yeah, absolutely.
But it is complicated as well, because tourism brings income or money to the national park, so it's all very complex.
Yeah, it's finding that balance between people getting to go and enjoy it and therefore wanting to look after it versus potentially causing damage by too many people being there, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
There's lots and lots of research now into the benefits of blue and green spaces and getting people out in nature, and certainly the kind of mental health benefits of it. I'm sure all of us on this, probably who are attending this call, will vouch for the benefit we get from being outdoors, but it's finding the right balance, and certainly spreading the load a little bit. And we'll definitely talk about this on the talk next month, of that you get honeypot sites. So I think Cumbria has become a bit of a honeypot site, because everybody knows about it. It's relatively easily accessible, and it is beautiful. But there are other very beautiful places in the UK, and we need to spread it out a little bit, so that it doesn't get focused just onto one spot. So did you have any more top tips for finding clean spots?
Clean spots, well, local knowledge. So you can check out, if you want to go away somewhere new, you can tap up swim coaches, and there's tons now which have become qualified. And
of course, all the local Facebook groups as well, they'll know.
Yeah. So after I swam the Thames, actually, and discovered the outdoor swimming community, lots of people, I didn't even really use Instagram that much before then. And then I started receiving messages, and this is when I first realized you can message people or get messages on Instagram. and people started inviting me to where they swim and offered me a warm bed, which is a danger zone because I'm quite nomadic and will always take the offer of a free bed and a swim. So then I decided to cycle to Scottish Cold Water Swimming Championships, and I stopped with people along the way, and it took 2 weeks, but it was so amazing that I continued for 6 months. And that was all basically organized through people messaging me, inviting me, or if I had a spot where no one was, then I'd use Facebook groups with these swimming groups, and they'd so knowledgeable about their area and would know someone who is available, and they'd put me in touch with the next spot too. So it was really quite social media is really helpful for swimming.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, I know I've learned about all kinds of someone's just put in the Rivers Trust map which will be in the links as well later that we send out. So that the local swim communities, I know there's certain river spots I go to now that I've learnt when is and isn't a good time to risk it, or to at least not put your head in. There's a big thing, and it's kind of like, if you are swimming in a river and you don't want to get really sick and you're a bit not sure, don't put your face in, because that's the way it's going to get into your body. But equally, be a bit careful afterwards as well. So, go home and have a shower. Make sure you wash your hands before you eat, because you're going to have the river water on your hands.
I'll always put my head in because I just love the sensation of getting my head under. But you don't drink the water unless you're in a peaty lake up in northern Scotland. But also just have awareness. So if I think it's amazing to use your local spots, but you might even have a shallow stream, but you don't need to you don't need to swim, because if you need to get your swimming, you can go to a pool or the sea or whatever. But just be aware of the environment, or if it's a slow gushing river, then maybe just walk along it to see if there's a faster bit.
And also, so the link that Phil's just put in the box is a really fantastic map of potential overflow locations. So as I said before, these don't tell you what is potentially coming out, because we don't have that information yet, but they will tell you where overflows are. So things like they show wastewater treatment works, and they could show the combined sewer overflows. So those little pipes you were talking about. Now, actually, some of those pipes that you will have swum past won't even be recognised combined sewer overflows. They could be overflows from factories, and there's all kinds of other ones that are not mapped that we don't know about as well. But that map's a fantastic resource. So if you're going somewhere, you can have a look at the spot that you're going to go to, and then trace upstream and see what there is. Now, if something's like miles and miles and miles upstream, the chances of it affecting where you're swimming right there are going to be slim. But if it's, a few hundred meters upstream, you might want to think a bit carefully about whether you're going to swim when the water's really, really high. Now, the important thing to remember is rivers are really dynamic. So certainly fast flowing ones, that pollution is going to wash away really quick if something does happen. So 24 hours time, it's going to be further away from that pollution source. Obviously, that pollution is going to get moved downstream, but it's going to get a bit more diluted. So again, it's trying to understand how river systems work and what happens as it all moves down. I've completely forgotten to do our second poll. Matt, can you bring our second poll up for us?
I'll just answer this question. Imogen said, it's good to hear a discussion of complexity of the issue. Does the simplistic view, which is discussed in media and campaigning, have any disadvantages? And I think that simplifying it is just the easier thing in media and campaigning. So talking about sewage or water companies and farming runoff, it's such a complicated issue that the more and the language that's brought in with it bores people, or they can't retain it. So I think actually that it's not a disadvantage by simplifying it. It's kind of, it has to be done really to make it a mainstream.
I completely agree. I mean, I've probably switched people off in that first 10 minutes with that presentation. I wonder if we lost you.
It's the age of everything. You sensationalize it, and it is frustrating sensationalizing stuff. But if it means it's getting people talking about it, then great.
Yeah, it draws people in as well. So that sensationalism and that instant simplicity does make people then go, oh, I'm going to read in a bit more to this.
Yeah.
You know, if we don't make it simple to access to start with, then they won't investigate further.
And actually, that's why I think I got onto the radar of it, because I think when Riverside did their documentary, I think George Monbiot's top line was that chicken shit was the reason why River Wye was dying, which you wouldn't really think about.
Yeah. So George, for those of you who don't know, George Monbiot did a fantastic it was a live stream, wasn't it, last year?
Yeah.
About the state of the River Wye, which is the kind of on the English-Welsh border. And it's a real mess because there have been masses of chicken farms allowed to develop kind of upstream, and all of the chicken effluent is allowed to run downstream. And it's not been well managed, it's not being contained like it should be. And also when things have gone through planning, there's no assessment of the cumulative impact of each of all of those farms. So they're looked at from a planning perspective on an individual basis and not looked at together. Now, what is coming through and is quite good, there are new nutrient strategies coming through in a lot of areas. At the moment, they're only for rivers which are designated as special areas of conservation. They're not for all rivers, but it does put specific requirements on planners and development to make sure that they don't excessively nutrify waterways, so they don't put they don't put all the shit in it that feeds all the algae. So the Wye is quite an unusual one because it is very much agricultural that's causing all the problems. That isn't so much the sewage and the wastewater treatment, it's an agricultural issue. So this is why the issues are so different across the country, and why whilst it's good to simplify it, and it needs to be simplified to catch everybody's attention, it is a really, really complex picture, and you need to look at where you are in the UK and assess where you are in the UK, rather than look at, well, okay, pollution's bad over here, therefore it must be bad here. And it may very well not be. It may be okay. I know where I live in the...
Did you mention River Trust's map of is my river safe to swim?
Yes. Yeah, that's what I was talking about, where you can look for the upstream to find the and that will go out. It's an ArcGIS file, but I think I've labelled it on this stuff for Matt to send out. So the Rivers Trust is a fantastic organisation who work with landowners, with water companies, with farmers to try and improve river health across the UK. They have local groups, so they're a national body, but they have individual local groups. So my local one is the Mersey Rivers Trust, because for all I'm in the Peak District, I'm at the top, right at the top end of the Mersey catchment. Do you know what your local one is, Lindsay?
The catchment of my River Trust?
Yeah.
Yeah, the Avon.
So it's the Avon, yeah. But they're super friendly and helpful, aren't they? They're fantastic.
Oh, yeah, and I think it's incredible because they work with the government and local councils and farms and water companies. They're kind of a mediator, and the work they do, the River Trust, is just phenomenal. Yeah.
So if you want to get involved with kind of improving water quality, it's worth approaching your local Rivers Trust to see if they have any projects that you can get involved in. I know I've volunteered as a river guardian for my Rivers Trust, so I'm waiting on training, and we go and I think we learn how to sample for invertebrate species, and they're used as an indicator to tell us what our river health is like. So where I live in the Peak District, I'm very high up in the catchment. There isn't a lot of heavy industry. It's not particularly heavily populated, so water quality is relatively good where I am. But as soon as I start moving downstream and we get into more of the villages a little bit further down in towns, and you can see the quality of the river degrades. And there's a project going on in a village near me where they have had, and they've had very, very obvious sewage outfalls that they're trying to work out where they're coming from and try to fix them. Yeah. So excellent. Go.
No, I was just going to say, a few people have asked about how to spot blue-green algae.
Right. I didn't put all my pictures up. One of my slides had a picture of blue-green algae on it. So it tends to be on still water, so you're not going to get it on a fast flowing river.
Yeah,
but
I
you might
don't
get
have
it on
much
slow flowing rivers
down here. It's normally lakes, isn't it?
Yeah, so it's usually lakes where the water can sit and it can grow, and it usually looks like a bluey green, sometimes oily film. When it gets really, really, really severe, it can go bright green. So I'm going to pull up my presentation again because there's a great picture of it. Come on. Okay, right. Share screen again. I'll flick through. So that green picture right in the bottom corner, can people see that? See that, Lindsay?
Yeah. So it's very vivid. It's quite a pretty green.
It's beautiful. I was gutted when this happened because it's my favourite colour, but I definitely didn't want to swim in it. But this got so severe that our entire reservoir went this colour. It was bright green. It was completely bonkers. Usually it's not like this. Usually it's kind of a thin film on the top. Sometimes it can be kind of lumpy, almost like tiny little lumps of broccoli or cauliflower, like a weird lumpy. And there's thousands and thousands of different types of blue green. So it's quite hard to. I'm going to turn off the bright green algae because then I can see the chat. Amy Ellis, I work for Wessex Rivers Trust. You can become a riverfly monitor where you sample invertebrates monthly. Yeah, that's the training I'm waiting on, Amy.
Wow.
Yeah, the combination of COVID and various other things meant that the training is still waiting a couple of years down the line. Yeah, so I've talked a little bit about what we could do to help support better river health, but there's other really small things we can do about just at home, isn't there? So we get these massive blockages in our sewers, which causes the water to back up and often causes these sewage spills, and it causes massive problems to the water industry. So as much as the water industry aren't great, they have some huge barriers to overcome and some huge costs because of what the public do.
Yeah.
So what do we need to not be doing?
We need to put only the three P's down the drain. Pee poo and what's the third one? Paper. That's it. Yeah. Actually, I've got a funny story about this. I was at my friend's house, and I did a number 2 in a loo, and then I got on with my day. I was writing at her house, and then they came back, and and my number 2 was still there. I was embarrassed, so I kept flashing it, and then the water rose, and I was like, oh my gosh. And my friend's husband had a friend coming around to watch the football. I was so embarrassed. Anyway, the next day someone came around to fix it and said so I thought it was my fault for doing it.
Yeah.
But they said that their drain was blocked with baby wipes, and it wasn't them, it was their neighbor. And because they share the same system, the neighbor has been flushing the baby wipes down the
and it's completely blocked it.
Yeah. Ugh. And I think a lot of people know not to, but I don't think it's not sort of widely known, is it?
Yeah, I think it always really, really astounds me that people put anything other than just toilet paper down the loo, like cotton buds, sanitary products, tampons and sanitary towels. They don't go down there; they go in the bin.
Yeah.
but equally, we've got a real problem with manufacturers labeling things as flushable. So like baby wipes, I've certainly never flushed, but you get these. I don't use single-use stuff. My mum does, and it drives me insane. But these single-use kind of wipes that you can wipe the toilet down with and whatever, and they say they're flushable on them, and maybe they are, but they're not flushable in our system. Our system cannot cope with them.
Yeah.
They need to go in the normal bin. So you get, people will probably seen pictures of them, but these huge, you get huge fatbergs, but they're a mixture of materials in the water that don't dissolve like toilet paper does, because toilet paper is really soft and it dissolves away. So stuff doesn't stick to it. But if you put something like a wet wipe down, or a sanitary product, other stuff that's in the drain will stick to it, and it all accumulates into these massive, great big blockages. And I've seen footage at water treatment works, and they have these massive, great big filters on the water as it comes in, and a physical human, a poor human, has to go in on a daily basis to have this they have this massive inspection hatch, and they go and fish out all the wet wipes off these grills.
Yeah.
Disgusting.
Yeah.
But it's a massive problem. Yeah. And also, please don't put oils and fats down the drain, because they accumulate. They may be runny when you pour them down, but once they cool down and stick to anything that's in there, they just go solid again and block everything up. Yeah. Yep.
It's funny though, isn't it? Because I suppose we're probably preaching to the converted here, but when people are interested, they'll know. But things like wet wipes and oil, I'm sure a lot of people would still not be aware that and I don't really know how best to get that information out, unless it goes through people's door. But then that's sort of
I know how you get it out. What's the best way to communicate things to adults? Go through their children.
Yeah.
When you're doing your talks. Yeah,
well, that was my idea, because it's such a complex issue, and the more I learn about it, the more complicated I get, but more complicated I find it. But that's why I like working with children, because they're really infused and engaged, and you can just simplify it, and then they can go and tell the adults off, the family off, and you don't want to be told off by a 5-year-old.
No. No, I used to in my old environment life, a very long time ago, I worked for a council, and I used to go and do talks to schools on waste management. So I was a waste management specialist, and I used to drum it into the little kids to go and tell your parents to put the stuff in the right bin.
Yeah.
Hopefully it works.
Yeah.
Maybe it did.
But that's good messaging as well. The 3 Ps down the drain, and no oil, etc.
Yeah, it's just so simple. It's just, and don't put, waste disposal. So, the shredders you get in sinks that you can put food down to put down the drain, they're awful. That food shouldn't be going down there. It needs to go in your normal bin.
Right.
Yeah, because it just all accumulates. I'm just flicking through to see if we've got any more questions that we haven't dealt with. So from Imogen, but putting people off by saying it's not safe to swim in any river, surely that doesn't help with people caring. I don't think any of the media attention is saying that it's not safe to swim in any river. I think the people who are that way will believe that anyway. The people who want to swim are going to go and swim. I think we've had there will be new data out this year from Outdoor Swimming magazine on numbers of people swimming, but certainly from research back in 2017, it was estimated that we had about 1.5 million people swimming outdoors, and that's in 2017.
Wow.
Now, Outdoor Swimming magazine estimated that kind of during the pandemic, that went up by 1.5 to 3 times. So we are in the millions of people actively accessing open water, whether in all coast, inland venues, rivers, dunking in a river, dunking in a waterfall, whatever, the whole shebang. So I just don't buy the argument that it's putting people massively off.
I think it's only good, because it'll make people want to fix the problem so that they can swim.
Yeah, and I think that was very evident through the campaign with the Environment Bill in October. There were lots and lots of swimmers got behind that and went, no, I want clean water to swim in. And what we've talked about today about finding clean places, and it is possible. I wouldn't. I've had questions before about swimming canals or in city centre rivers, and I'm like, maybe not in either of those. Canals are really shallow and full of boats and all kinds of nasty stuff.
And dead bodies.
And dead bodies. And city centre rivers do tend to be more polluted because there is more housing. There might be a little bit of industry. There's shopping trolleys and all sorts end up in city centre rivers. But outside of that, we do have some clean waterways.
Barbara's just asked, it would be great to develop easy and quick tests to check water quality, a bit like lateral flow tests. And that's exactly what the citizen science kits are, which I did along my journey, which you can see in the film. I don't know if it's been shared, but I'll share it in a bit. And yes, so River Trust and Earthwatch have these little kits, and you scoop up the water in a little pot, and then pretty similar to the lateral flow, then you suck it up into this tube and you can test for phosphates and nitrates, and then you have a little chart to measure it against the color. So it's really easy to assess, and it's really fun for kids to do, and you can turn it into an activity or hobby for them. But the great thing the other great thing with it is that you can upload it into an app on your phone, and then that is put into a database which is shared across the whole entire world, and then you can use that to lobby your local environmental agency to say, hey, come and check out this spot because it's been poor for the last however long.
Yeah, that's fantastic. Yeah, that's awesome. I think what is quite important to get across is there isn't a testing system, such a quick testing system that can check for Imogen's just answered my question. There isn't a test that can check for things that are going to cause humans harm. So nitrates and phosphates will over nutrify the water, so they are damaging that environment, but it isn't what we're looking for things that do harm to human health are intestinal bacteria. So it's E. coli and enterococci that they test for, and that has to be tested in a lab.
Yeah.
So the venue that I run a little venue up in the Peaks, and we do water tests every year. So we have to take a sample, it goes off to the lab, it takes 3 or 4 days to mature and get the result back, and it costs us like 50 quid a pop or something. So unfortunately, yeah, and that's quite cheap. We found it cheap. There are other places that are more expensive.
Right.
But as a swimmer, there isn't yet a kit that can tell you that quickly, like a lateral flow. Yeah, there's some really good quick test kits, but there isn't. We've not quite got there with that. It's it's a bit more complicated. Yeah.
But it's all good with even the citizen science with phosphates and nitrates. It's getting it on people's radars to sort of keep the pressure on the water company.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. Definitely. And you know what I said about us not having a very good picture of the whole problem, that's where citizen scientists come in, because we can help them with that information and support with that information. And also, one of the headlines I shared was about the Environment Agency staff being told not to investigate small pollution incidents, even if you report an incident and it isn't instantly checked, they don't come out and enforce it or check where it's coming from or anything, that incident's still been logged, so it's still evidence of a pollution event. So it's still really important that if you see a pollution event from anywhere, make sure that you report it to the Environment Agency. It's really easy. You can find it if you Google pollution reporting Environment Agency, it'll come up. I meant to share it on the links we had, but I didn't get around to digging out the link. Yeah, but that's a really important thing that we can do as swimmers, to keep an eye on the rivers, because the water companies and the EA haven't got people there all the time, and a lot of us are using rivers on a daily basis where we've actually got the best eyes and ears on the water. Let's share that information. Cool. Well, I think we've finished all the questions. If anybody has any last minute questions they want to ask us, please ping stuff in the box. Giving you 2 seconds. No, doesn't look like anyone's typing. In which case, does the pollution reporting have to be a phone call? I have to admit, I'm not 100% sure. It was at one point. I don't know whether there's now an online form. Check on that link that Imogen just put up.
Oh, yeah.
Okay, yeah, looks like it maybe has to be a phone call. Maybe that's one of the recommendations to come out of. recent studies though. So there was there's been an investigation by the government, by the Environmental Audit Committee recently in the last year, looking into water quality, and the report that came out of that was pretty scathing. They make quite severe recommendations to the government to change systems and to improve the way we monitor, to improve the way the water industry is managed as well, because there are some massive problems there. So kind of keeping pressure on that as well and making sure some of that comes through is really important. So yeah, if you can find the time and find a way to write to your MP, go do it. Say you want cleaner water. Potentially too big a question, but are we, the public, willing to face the costs of improving the network? New, better sewer networks could mean higher bills. Yeah. So this is one of the biggies, and this is one of the things that is difficult and frustrating. So one of the headlines I shared was about quite substantial dividends being paid to the shareholders and private investors of our private water companies. Now, our water companies across the UK are monopolies. So you don't have a choice about where you get your water from. It's based on geography, because you are in a certain catchment of a water system, and that's who manages your water. You can't shop around. So you can't go, well, I don't like your service, so I'm going to go elsewhere. So to manage that, it's regulated. So regulated by Ofwat, which you will have probably all heard of. And their remit has very much been to keep water rates low. And looking across the world and talking to friends who work internationally, we don't pay much for water in this country. We actually don't pay enough, which is one of the reasons that we have so many problems. And I know that, you know, in our current age of people really struggling to pay their bills, that's difficult. But Ofwat have focused so much on keeping bills low that it has restricted the investment that's been needed to the system to improve the system over time. So there have been improvements to water treatment works, but they haven't been at the level of capacity that we've needed to accommodate increasing populations and changing climate. So there is a difficult position where we need to find investment to pay for all that improvement. And that improvement should have been happening over the last 25, 30 years since the water system was privatised, and it hasn't been. This is one of the big beefs that the media has had.
And this is what I don't understand, Susie, is when shareholders are making such a huge amount of profit, and haven't been doing, and the water companies haven't been improving the service, how can there be such a profit if we're not getting the service that we've been paying for?
It's something that Ofwat faced a lot of criticism for in that audit committee report, because they were allowing those profits to go out to shareholders rather than being invested back in the system. The way the system is structured is not great. They run on 5-year funding cycles. And because of that, it means that they don't plan ahead. And a lot of these things need to be planned ahead 20, 30, 40 years. So that onward constant investment doesn't happen. They look in such short timescales that the change doesn't happen that needs to happen.
Right.
Yeah, it's a very messed up system. It's a big justification for the water sector, particularly, to come back into public ownership. Yeah, but that's how private corporations work. That's how private business works. If I invested in something, I would expect a return on my investment. So the hands are tied to an extent in that their investor expects the money back. But it hasn't been forced enough, in my opinion, by both government and regulator level. It's probably not widely known that water companies have a vast programme of phosphate removal schemes across many sewage works. And since COVID-19 made an appearance, use of bleach and soaps have increased too. Yeah. So water treatment works do remove phosphates from water that goes through their system. So the majority of our phosphate input, well, actually, it comes across a couple of sources. So a lot of phosphates that come into our systems are from agriculture, but also that phosphate removal doesn't remove all of it before it's pumped out of the water systems. And also, an interesting little snippet of information, water companies actually have to add phosphate to our drinking water to prevent lead leaking out from old lead pipes. So the water companies themselves are adding phosphates into the system to start with. Yeah, this is where it gets complicated. But yeah, the increase of bleaches and soaps as well will increase phosphate levels in our waters too. So the kind of COVID-19 link and people washing and cleaning more. Tap water is high in nitrates too. Yep, right. I think we're probably good. Lindsay, any more questions for me?
I think that's good. I think you covered quite a lot, actually. Yeah, it's fascinating, but also, and one of the sad things I think is it's similarly with climate change, when you spend a lot of time campaigning or protesting or marching the streets, it can really weigh you down, and you can become exhausted and think, I can't handle it anymore. And with all that information you've delivered just then, I thought, oh crikey, could be deemed a losing battle. But I think the important thing to remember is to still care. And so we should have a right to be able to swim in our waters. It's the most beautiful thing. And rivers by far are my favorite, because it's just a piece of magic which is free, and you're at one with nature. So I think we should do all we can to look after them.
Yeah. And I think what happened in October with the Environment Bill and with everybody campaigning, just, individuals in their own tiny way sending a letter made had a massive impact. That was a real moment where I thought, oh God, we can make a difference. We absolutely can make a difference to this. Yeah. If we all share one voice. Yeah.